Welcome to Empathy Stories, where we explore tales that touch the heart and remind us of the profound lessons hidden within life's challenges. Today's story takes us to a small village where lies, betrayal, and a search for true love lead to an extraordinary journey of redemption and forgiveness. Stay tuned. Ethan Walker had everything most people could ever dream of: a sprawling penthouse in Manhattan, a garage full of exotic cars, and a bank account so large it could fund generations. But with all his wealth came a hollow ache that no amount of material possessions could fill. Ethan's life had become a series of repetitive social events, shallow conversations, and relationships that fizzled the moment they stopped benefiting the other party. Despite the luxury surrounding him, he felt profoundly alone. His wealth had become both a blessing and a curse, turning every interaction into a game of guessing people's true intentions. He tried everything to find genuine companionship. He dated women from every social stratum, hoping to find someone who valued him for his character rather than his assets. But each time, he realized they were drawn to his wealth, his power, or the fantasy of what he represented. After years of disappointment, Ethan decided he needed to try something radical. If the world couldn't look past his wealth, he would strip it away, at least. In appearance, one chilly autumn morning, Ethan left his luxury life behind, determined to live anonymously in a rural town far from Manhattan's gleaming skyscrapers. He didn't tell his friends, nor did he leave any clues for his powerful father, a man whose only concern was maintaining the Walker family legacy. Ethan disguised himself as a man who had hit rock bottom, a wheelchair-bound beggar. His expensive suits were replaced with worn, patched clothes, and he wore a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He had one goal: to see if someone could look past the illusion of poverty and care for him simply for who he was. Ethan's destination was a quiet town nestled in the Pennsylvania countryside. Life moved slower there, with old-fashioned diners, small farms, and people who still knew their neighbors by name. It was far removed from the world Ethan knew. He set up his spot on a corner near the town's tiny general store, holding out his hand to passersby and whispering, "Please help me." Days passed, and no one stopped to offer him more than a glance. Ethan had never felt so invisible in his life. The people who hurried past him didn't know he was a billionaire in disguise, but their indifference cut him deeply. For the first time, he tasted what it was like to be overlooked, ignored, and judged. His heart grew heavy, and doubt began to creep in. Had he made a mistake? Was he destined to be unloved, whether rich or poor? Then, on a crisp afternoon, a young woman stopped in front of him. Grace Miller was a local farm girl with a heart as warm as the sun. She had soft, kind eyes, her auburn hair tied back in a simple braid, and a modest demeanor that radiated sincerity. Grace didn't have much herself. Her father, Robert, worked tirelessly on their small farm to make ends meet, but she had always believed in helping others. As Grace stood before Ethan, she noticed the weariness in his eyes and the way he tried to hide his embarrassment at asking for help. "Are you okay?" she asked gently, crouching down so they were at eye level. Ethan blinked, stunned by her question. No one had spoken to him in days. "I'm just trying to get by," he said, his voice low and shaky, as he tried to keep up his act. Grace reached into her small purse and pulled out a few crumpled bills. "I don't have much, but this should help you get something warm to eat," she said with a smile. Ethan hesitated before taking the money. Her kindness was unlike anything he'd experienced in years. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice breaking slightly. "You don't know what this means to me." Grace nodded. "Do you have a place to stay?" "No," Ethan admitted, the weight of his lie pressing on him. "I don't." Grace's brow furrowed in concern. "That's not right. You shouldn't be out here alone." She paused, considering her next move. "I'd take you home. But my father, well, let me talk to him first." That evening, Grace returned home to their small, weathered farmhouse and explained Ethan's situation to her father. Robert was a man of simple values and quiet strength. His hands were calloused from years of labor, and his face bore the lines of a life lived humbly. When Grace told him about the man she had met, He sighed deeply. We don't have much. Grace, he said, his voice tired but kind. But no one deserves to be left out there in the cold. If you think this man needs help, bring him here. Overjoyed, Grace returned to Ethan the next morning. My father said you can stay with us, she told him, her smile brighter than the sun rising behind her. It's not much, but we'll make it work. Ethan was overwhelmed by her offer. He had never met anyone so selfless. Thank you, he said, his voice trembling. You don't know how much this means. As Ethan rolled his wheelchair into their modest home, he felt a warmth that no luxury mansion had ever provided. For the first time, someone had looked past his appearance, past his wealth or lack thereof, and treated him with genuine kindness. But beneath his gratitude, a knot of guilt began to form. How long could he keep up this lie? And what would happen when Grace and Robert learned the truth? Ethan had set out to find true love, but he was beginning to realize that love built on a foundation of deception might crumble before it even had the chance to grow. Ethan had been living with Grace and her father Robert for several weeks, and each day deepened his admiration for their simple, genuine way of life. Grace's laughter was like music that softened the ache in his chest, and Robert's quiet wisdom gave Ethan a perspective he had never known. Their kindness reminded him of what he had been searching for: real human connection, free from pretense. Yet every moment of warmth was shadowed by the heavy weight of his secret. Ethan hadn't planned on staying this long, but something about Grace had captured him. She was unlike anyone he'd ever met, selfless, humble, and full of quiet strength. He found himself yearning to confess the truth, to show her who he really was. But every time he considered it, fear held him back. What if revealing his wealth destroyed the fragile bond they had built? What if Grace and Robert turned away from him, feeling betrayed? One cool evening, as the sun set over the farm, Ethan and Grace sat together on the porch. The fading light painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. Grace was quiet, her gaze fixed on the horizon, but Ethan could sense something was on her mind. You've been with us for a while now, she said softly, breaking the silence. I don't mean to pry, but I feel like there's so much you're not telling me. Who are you? Really? Ethan? Ethan's chest tightened. He had known this moment would come, but he still wasn't ready. I'm just a man trying to figure things out, he said, forcing a smile. Life hasn't been easy. Grace studied him for a long moment, her expression a mix of curiosity and concern. You can trust us. You know, my father and I, we're not here to judge you. Ethan wanted to believe her. He wanted to lay everything bare, to tell her the truth about his wealth and his reasons for coming here. But the fear of losing her was too great, so he stayed silent, letting her words hang in the air. The next day, while Ethan was sitting in the small garden Robert had built for him, Grace approached him with an excited look on her face. Ethan, we've been working on something, she said, her eyes bright. It's not much, but we think it might help. Before he could respond, Robert joined them, carrying a small wooden box. Inside were neatly folded bills, money they had saved from selling fruits, vegetables, and some of their livestock. We've been setting this aside for your surgery, Robert explained. It's not enough yet, but we'll get there. Ethan felt his stomach drop. He had never asked for their help, but their generosity only made his deception feel more cruel. This family, who had so little, was willing to sacrifice for him, a man who didn't even need their charity. The guilt was overwhelming. Why would you do this for me? Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Robert smiled, his weathered face kind. Because that's what people do for each other. When someone's in need, you help them. That's just how it is. Ethan couldn't take it anymore. That night, after Grace and Robert had gone to bed, he sat alone in the living room, the small box of money on the table in front of him. He stared at it, his mind racing. He had to tell them the truth. He owed them that much. The next morning, as the family sat around the breakfast table, Ethan cleared his throat. There's something I need to tell you, he began, his voice trembling. Grace and Robert looked at him expectantly, sensing the seriousness in his tone. I haven't been completely honest with you, Ethan admitted. I'm not who you think I am. The words came tumbling out. each one heavier than the last. He told them everything: his wealth, his decision to disguise himself, and his search for genuine love. He confessed how much their kindness had meant to him and how deeply he regretted deceiving them. When he finished, the room was silent. Grace stared at him, her eyes wide with shock. Robert's face was unreadable, but Ethan could see the hurt in his eyes. "You lied to us," Grace said finally, her voice trembling. "All this time, you let us believe you were someone you're not. You let us work for you, sacrifice for you, and it was all a lie." "I didn't mean to hurt you," Ethan said desperately. "I just wanted to find someone who cared about me for who I am, not for my money. I never expected to meet people as kind and selfless as you. I got caught up in the lie, and I didn't know how to tell you the truth." Robert stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "You let us sell what little we had, believing you needed help," he said, his voice low and filled with disappointment. "You made us believe we were doing something good, but it was all for nothing." "It wasn't for nothing," Ethan pleaded. "You showed me what real kindness looks like. You reminded me what it means to care about others. I didn't deserve your help, but I'll never forget what you've done for me." Grace shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I thought I knew you," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought you were someone I could trust. But now, I don't know what to believe." Ethan reached out to her, but she pulled away. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice filled with regret. "I never meant to hurt you." Robert placed a hand on Grace's shoulder. "We need some time," he said firmly. "You should go." Ethan felt his heart shatter as he wheeled himself out of the house. The warmth and love he had found here had been replaced by cold silence. He had come to the village searching for something real, but his lies had destroyed everything he had hoped to build. As he left, he couldn't shake the image of Grace's tear-streaked face or the disappointment in Robert's eyes. For the first time in his life, Ethan realized that no amount of money could fix what he had broken. The days after Ethan's departure were heavy with grief and silence. Grace and Robert went about their daily routines, but the warmth that once filled their small home seemed to have vanished. Grace's laughter, once so vibrant, was replaced by quiet sobs in the solitude of her room. Robert, though composed on the surface, carried the weight of betrayal in his weary eyes. Ethan's lies had cut deeply, not because of his wealth, but because of the trust he had shattered. For Ethan, the days were equally tormenting. Back in his lavish home in the city, surrounded by every comfort money could buy, he felt more isolated than ever. The guilt gnawed at him relentlessly. The faces of Grace and Robert haunted his thoughts, their kindness and sacrifice standing in stark contrast to the deception he had woven. For the first time in his life, Ethan realized that his wealth, which had always been a shield, was now a barrier he desperately wanted to tear down. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan made a decision. He could no longer live with the pain of what he had done. He had to make things right, not with grand gestures or apologies, but by proving that his remorse was genuine. He couldn't change the past, but he could try to rebuild the trust he had broken. Ethan returned to the village, his heart pounding as he approached Grace and Robert's home. The small house stood in the soft glow of twilight, its modest charm a stark reminder of the life he had left behind. Taking a deep breath, Ethan knocked on the door. When the door opened, Grace stood before him, her expression a mixture of surprise and guarded emotion. Her eyes, red from days of crying, searched his face for answers. "Grace," Ethan began, his voice trembling, "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need to say this. I lied to you, and I betrayed your trust. That was wrong, and I will regret it for the rest of my life. But I want to make things right. If you'll let me." Grace didn't respond immediately. Instead, she stepped aside, allowing him to enter. Robert was seated at the kitchen table, his face etched with the same weariness Ethan had seen before. The room was tense, filled with unspoken words and emotions. Ethan sat down across from Robert and Grace. "I came back because you've shown me something I didn't think I'd ever find. What it means to truly care for someone without expecting anything in return. You gave me a glimpse of the kind of man I want to be, I don't expect forgiveness, but I want to help you in any way I can. Robert folded his hands, his gaze steady and firm. We don't need your money, Ethan, he said quietly. What we needed was honesty, and that's what you took from us. Ethan nodded, tears brimming in his eyes. I understand, and I know I can't buy back your trust. But please, let me show you that I've changed. I don't want to leave here knowing I've caused nothing but pain. Grace, who had been silent, finally spoke, her voice soft but resolute. Trust isn't something you can rebuild overnight. Ethan, you hurt us deeply, but I can see you're trying. It's not forgiveness. Not yet, but maybe we can start with understanding. Over the next few weeks, Ethan worked tirelessly to prove his sincerity. He helped Robert on the farm, learning the rhythm of their hard work and the pride they took in their small accomplishments. He spent time with Grace, not trying to win her back, but simply being present, listening to her stories and laughing at her jokes when the moments allowed. Slowly, the walls they had built began to crack. One day, as the three of them sat together in the garden, Robert finally broke the silence. You've worked hard, Ethan. I see it, and I respect it. But trust takes time. If you're willing to keep trying, we're willing to give you a chance. Ethan felt a wave of relief and gratitude wash over him. Thank you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I'll keep trying, for as long as it takes. As time passed, the bond between them began to heal. Grace found herself smiling more often, her laughter returning in small, unexpected bursts. Robert, though still cautious, grew to admire Ethan's determination and humility. The man who had once arrived as a stranger, cloaked in lies, was slowly becoming someone they could rely on. One evening, as the three of them sat under the stars, Grace turned to Ethan. I don't know what the future holds, she said softly, but I know that you've changed, and that means something. Ethan looked at her, his heart swelling with hope. Thank you, he whispered, for giving me a second chance. The journey to redemption was far from over. But for the first time, Ethan felt that he was on the right path. He had found something far more valuable than wealth or power. He had found a family, a purpose, and a love built on trust and honesty. And he vowed to never take it for granted again. Thank you for joining us on this heartfelt journey of love, trust, and redemption. Stories like these remind us that even in the face of betrayal, the power of sincerity and second chances can heal the deepest wounds. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to Empathy Stories. Let's continue spreading compassion and kindness. One story at a time. Stay safe, and see you in our next episode.